Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, August 31st, the last day of August 2023. Time for another month. We'll bring you another one shortly, probably about 24 hours from now. And that's how it officially begins. This is now the case. We've gotten it written into statute in several states that new months only begin when I announce them on the show, and they have to pay an enormous amount of money to me in order to endorse a new month. It's a fantastic setup. But not unlike having the Alliance Defending Freedom provide mandatory religious sensitivity training to lawyers or NRA paid officials, being paid to certify people as qualified to carry guns everywhere they go, including to schools, bars, and churches, stuff like that. You know, it's a good arrangement. Seems like there's a lot of good arrangements to siphon money out of the economy happening these days. There's lots of them. It's not necessarily headline news, but it is in the news. And that's how I come across all these weird stories. It's getting toward the end of the week. Maybe it's a good time to share some of these things with you. Just by way of clarifying what the hell I'm talking about. I happen to have noticed passing around stories today that, once again, sort of highlight the ability of a certain segment of grifters in the world to just magically siphon off an enormous amount of money without anybody questioning them. Now, occasionally they do end up getting questioned. Like, for instance, Andrew Tate, who faces charges of, I don't know, what else? There's like kidnapping and sex trafficking and a number of other charges pending against him in Romania. But I just happened to be reading a BBC report about, I guess they've gotten a hold of some of the text messages and emails that circulated among his inner circle that will be used against him in court in Romania when they come around to trial. And just, I don't know, the amazing ability that people have. I suppose there's a lot of people in the world. And while the vast, overwhelming majority of them, first of all, will never have heard of you. And secondly, those who have heard of you, still the overwhelming majority aren't going to go along with the scheme like this. But I guess if you reach a large enough audience, and that's what we're trying to do here, if we can just reach billions, then some number of a couple dozen will just provide us with an enormous amount of money. And we can steal it and go on and have a happy lifestyle up until the point where we're arrested by Romanian authorities, I would guess. I don't know. I can't figure out how these things happen. And it's one of like half a dozen stories sitting out there today for some reason, almost as though it were calling me and telling me, you too can be a grifter. Why aren't you doing this? Just of enormous numbers of people, that is to say more than one, and so therefore fascinating, who just exist by telling people, hey, I'm doing an amazing thing and you like amazing things, don't you? Give me some money in large chunks, and they go ahead and do it. I just saw the other day that the guy who was responsible for the debacle of the Fire Festival, which I have renewed interest in because it took place on Great Exuma Island in Bahamas, and I have now visited that place. Oh, okay. Interesting, right? I remember that it was this awful debacle, and apparently a big enough fraud that he actually served jail time for it, and now he's out, and he's immediately jumped into promoting Fire Festival 2, and there are people who will say, yes, here's money for tickets to this yet unplanned Fire Festival. It's going to be amazing, epic. And in some measure, it is said that a lot of people who were buying tickets are probably like, it's so, the first one became so legendary for being an epic failure that there's something somehow amazingly daring and cool with showing that you can drop enough cash that you can afford to waste it on a possible scam and likely scam like Fire Festival 2. I don't know. It's just amazing. I can't believe it. Andrew Tate same sort of thing, as it turns out, as I'm reading this BBC article, and maybe it's the sort of thing we could dive into on a Friday. The headline is Andrew Tate chats in War Room. He had a group called War Room too, not the Steve Bannon podcast War Room, but another thing. It's war. It sounds manly, right? So we'll have a war room. That's what we'll call it. And you give me lots of money. Chats in War Room suggest dozens of women groomed. I can't believe it that the conservative manliness guru is actually a sex pest and groomer, but that's what it appears to be all about, as it turns out. What interested me mostly was that this so-called war room was some sort of like elite club that he started, the idea of which, I guess, for most of the listeners of his podcast, etc., was you would pay to join this war room, and I don't know what the hell it is, a chat group, or do they get together at some point? And anyway, the idea is if you are a lowly worm, you can become an amazing Studley superhero and learn all the secrets of how to, kidnap and groom women internationally, just like him. And you would get your instruction from quote-unquote generals in the war room, supposedly wildly successful, powerful men from around the world who would give you their secrets of success, except they all used pseudonyms, so you could never really be sure that any of them were successful anythings. And apparently he got people to pay $8,000 a year to be members of the war room, which is astonishing and makes me say, couldn't we do this without kidnapping or grooming anybody and ask people for $5, and wouldn't that work? And apparently it does not. So I guess you got to have some evil bent to it. By the way, $8,000 a year works out. I'm just curious whether this is why they did it. It works out to $666 a month, and I wonder whether they thought that would be cute and clever. And look how evil we are. We charge people $666 each month, and they pay it, and then we tell them, here's a good idea. If you would like to get a date, kidnap someone and then maybe groom them and turn them into a sex worker online. I don't know why people think that's good advice. It is not. Don't do it. Go Romania. Good luck prosecuting him, and maybe you want to round up a couple dozen of these lunatics as well. Not the top line news today. Just I happened to see that and a couple other stories all about weirdo grifting. And it makes me wonder whether we're missing out. I don't know. Anyway, Greg Dworkin is here, and he's got news to report to you, all on the up and up. No one's been kidnapped for this news. No one has to listen against their will. We're fine, upstanding people, and we do it for less. We're a discount service. Good morning, Greg. How are you?
Good morning. So it's such an old idea.
Yeah.
There's actually a Wikipedia page. For pickup artist, or PUA as it's called.
That's right. Okay.
PIA, I would think. Often self-identified as the seduction community or the pickup community, a movement whose goal is the seduction and sexual success.
Whee!
It exists through internet newsletters and blogs, marketing, seminars, coaching, forums, groups. I'm just saying.
Sure,
he didn't
definitely
come up with
predates. Yeah, that's true. I mean, he just used the internet to what it does is it helps, I guess, boost the success of it by saying, well, like I said, 99.999% of people in the world want nothing to do with that.
Right. Finding
that 0.001%. How many zeros do I need to get it right? The internet helps you do that. You can find them internationally. So great. You never have to leave
the Wikipedia
Romanian
description,
house.
And I'm relying on Wikipedia because I really don't know anything about it otherwise.
That's fair in this case.
Is that they have local clubs also, which are known as lairs.
Oh, wonderful. That's where you should be.
In this particular case, I guess Andrew Tate decided to go with the well-known war room. And I was just thinking, why not, pick a room that you spend a lot of time living in and name it the living room.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Or perhaps put a bed in there and you could call it the bathroom.
Yes, because why not?
Because why not? Because it's a stupid idea.
Just throw him a curveball. Yeah, it is interesting. This picture, by the way, of Andrew Tate holding forth outside his home in Bucharest to a set of adoring well, not adoring fans, but maybe they are, but news people, holding microphones, identifying their outlets. But what's interesting about this photo of him is not the number of microphones around him, but the number of microphones being held by hands that have Gothic Germanic lettering tattooed all the way up the forearm. It's an interesting subsegment of the press. Post. Yeah. It's just sort of...
Or not.
Yeah. But I don't know. Maybe I don't recognize any of the outlets because they're European. So they might be legit, or they might just be a guy with, Nazi with podcast is there. And I guess that's
Very
probably
strange.
what's happening.
Very
strange. Weird, man. I just wanted to,
so
bring people a nice program
international,
for a couple
I'm going to
bucks.
switch topics because there's much else you want to talk about this.
I don't know, but now I'm an influencer now. Look what I did.
Oh, yeah. Well, you better charge for it. So, Jens Stoltenberg, who is the NATO Secretary General, told CNN,
Hello, General.
It's important to support Ukraine as its forces push through heavily defended Russian-occupied territory. He went on to say Ukrainians are exceeding expectations again and again, and war analyst Phillips O'Brien, a Brit, says, the narrative is changing. Maybe people will stop lecturing the Ukrainians to fight more like NATO. So there was a lot of pushback about all that leaked stuff. Well, the U.S. says Ukraine is stuck. The U.S. says this. Unnamed people say the Ukrainians are that. In fact, the Institute for the Study of War and a couple other people heavily criticized these anonymous sources as being both wrong and unhelpful because the Ukrainians are, in fact, trading artillery and then making moves. And the most of the moves that they make are south. U.S. had, in these anonymous articles, criticized Ukraine for not putting enough troops south and keeping them north and east. The Western Front is like inactive. The Eastern Front is static. The Northern Front has Ukrainian troops to make sure that the Russians don't attack there while the Ukrainians are moving south. Mm-hmm. So it's all strategic. And in fact, having attrited artillery, they're now starting to pick up ground. It's slow because it's mined, it's heavily fortified, but they're breaking through, front lines for the Russian defense. So that's what's going on there. And again, it's a very slow-moving picture, so there's not much to say about it day to day. But you look at it week to week, and absolute progress.
Well, congratulations.
So all the people who say, "Well, it's stalled, it's a stalemate," they don't know what they're talking about.
It's been going on for a while.
It must be political pundits because
and
political pundits also don't know what they're talking about.
It used to be that fighting to a stalemate with the Russian army was pretty big measure of success, actually.
Right.
But, yeah.
Right. Part of the question is, what happened? They're cutting off Crimea. They're moving in the south, and we'll see what happens.
Like most stories.
See
what happens.
Here's another story about we'll see what happens. Mitch McConnell, who doesn't look well and looks like 50 pounds lighter than the last picture I saw of him. Mitch McConnell appears to freeze again while talking with reporters. I don't know if you heard about that.
Yeah, I did. I mean, I noted it mentally.
It's disappointing. I mean, it's sad. It's unfortunate. I worry about him. And his aides just walking him off the stage and saying, we'll get back to you, I don't think is sufficient. As Craig Spencer, the well-known emergency room doc, the Ebola doc who went bowling in Brooklyn, but is an emergency room doc by profession, said, please, if you see anybody you know or love have this kind of event, bring them to the emergency room immediately.
Yeah. Did they not do that with him?
No. They did not do that. So, the worry is it's a transient ischemic attack or a mini stroke or some event of neurologic origin, not just dehydration. And it's a big deal, and he needs to get it checked out. That doesn't mean he has to automatically retire, but he ought not to run again. And by the way, this has nothing to do with how old he is. It's all a question of how healthy he is.
All right, although I would have thought that, I would have a different reaction if a 30-year-old does it. You should be thinking about those neurological events. But
same thing in a 70-year-old.
You'd probably be like, well, I don't know, is something else happening here? And then we're conditioned to believe that that's more frequently
conditioned
the case
to
with older
waste
folks.
time and not get that person immediately to the emergency room, as the ER doc specialist suggests.
Right. Well, no one wants to be involved.
I mean, there's no harm in getting it checked out.
That's true. That's the smart way of dealing with it. We try to rationalize it away and come up with a reason not to undertake this very scary course of treatment, or what can be frightening. But
right, you don't want to do it because it would hurt your reelection chances. Let's just put it that way.
Okay. Right, then you should be thinking more long term. And he's been there a long time. There were probably question marks about how long he would serve. Anyway, this is a good reason to maybe step down. But okay.
Here's the description.
Yeah.
McConnell took questions from reporters in Covington, Kentucky after talking with a local group. A reporter asked him about running for re-election, then repeated the question twice when McConnell said he couldn't hear it. And then McConnell chuckled and said, and stopped.
Now, that doesn't
7
necessarily...
seconds, an aide approached and asked the senator if he had heard the question. McConnell stared straight ahead, and the aide asked reporters to give him a minute. Another aide walked over and spoke to McConnell, who signaled he was fine. And he cleared his throat and said, okay, and then continued to take questions, but his answers were stilted. In total, the minority leader was silent for more than 20 seconds. The spokesman for McConnell said he was momentarily lightheaded, and he's going to consult a doctor before his next event as a prudential measure. That would make sense if his next event is getting into the car, leaving this event.
Yes, that's true. The fact that he's, I don't know. Who knows? My hope as a human being is
I'm not
that
wishing ill of him. I want him to get it checked out. This potentially is very serious. And given the fact that it's potentially very serious, we're also talking in a political sense about losing Mitch McConnell as the minority leader.
Yeah. Well, that was going to happen eventually, and you should always be thinking ahead to those things. My hope
and
is
I don't know
he's
that John
simply
Thune is the same bulwark
things.
against MAGA that McConnell has been. Like him or dislike him.
That's true. It hasn't been great, but there's not that much you can do against the entire party turning against you. You can only slow the turn, I suppose. Slow
the turn is what you need to do. We, again, haven't talked too much about the hurricane. Of interest is many of the stories are a lot of physical devastation, but very few lives lost. There's only 2 confirmed deaths, and those are motor vehicle accidents because for some reason people were out in the storm.
Going to the doctor to get checked out after a bad
press
conference.
Acceptable. Anything else is not.
Okay. Ebola. You were going to the ER.
Yeah. Ebola. Not a good idea. So again, it's going to take a while to assess the damage, but it was a big deal that the storm turned north and hit the Big Bend, the more rural, poorer area, and didn't hit Tampa head on. That would have been a much bigger disaster. And it's not like the people in Tampa are more important than the people in the Big Bend. It's that they're more numerous.
I see. So, all right. So I guess it has to make landfall. There's nowhere you can land on the Florida
But it's also
coast
true
where
nobody cares
people.
about Tallahassee.
Oh, all right.
That's always been true.
Fair enough then. Okay. So, fast-moving storm,
That's
as you mentioned.
Being in New York and saying, what about Albany? And, New York City's like, okay,
I'm sorry, Albany, but yeah, that's possibly true. All right. Fast-moving storm, as you mentioned, so it didn't linger, but all right, I guess we got away without...
Well, hit Georgia and then the Carolinas, and again, Southern Virginia may be getting hit today.
Maybe. I don't know. I'll ask them. How's it going?
Another story, and again, this is a Trump lawsuit, but not one we talk about much because it's a civil suit. And it was the first of them, even before Alvin Bragg. Letitia James, the Attorney General in New York State, is suing Trump over his fraudulent activity at Trump Incorporated.
Oh, yes. Okay.
As the New York Times puts it, before Donald J. Trump was indicted 4 times over, he was sued by New York's Attorney General, who said that for years the former president, his business, and members of his family had fraudulently overvalued their assets by billions of dollars.
They did.
I believe the Trump defense is going to be, well, it's New York, everybody does it. That's what you do in real estate. That's the real estate game.
Yeah.
I don't know that that's going to fly. Before any of these criminal trials will take place, Trump is scheduled for a civil trial in New York in October of this year.
You're right.
During the trial, the Attorney General will seek to bar him and 3 of his children from leading their family business, the Trump Organization, and require him to pay a fine of around $250 million that, of course, he doesn't have because his net worth is inflated. Mm-hmm. On Wednesday, but he can borrow it from Jared. On Wednesday, Ms. James fired an opening salvo, arguing that a trial isn't necessary to find Mr. Trump and other defendants inflated the value. The fraud was so pervasive, she said in a court filing, that he boosted his net worth by between $812 million and $2.2 billion every year over the course of a decade.
Cumulatively, or? I guess it doesn't matter if it really wasn't true.
It says each year.
So does he have like $500 billion now? Is that what the idea is?
Based on the undisputed evidence, no trial is required for the court to determine that defendants presented grossly materially inflated asset values.
Okay.
Now, Mr. Trump in return said, remember it's Mr. Trump because New York Times and that's their style guide. Yeah. Mr. Trump argued the entire case should be thrown out.
Oh, yeah, that's a good argument.
Legal time limit. Mm-hmm. He received most of the loans in question too long ago for the matter to be considered by a court.
All right. So we call that statute of limitations. He calls it legal time limit. Mm. Okay.
So both filings seek what's known as a summary judgment, a ruling from the judge. We'll see what happens.
Another one. All right. Well, you can't hold me liable for loans that were taken out before the Continental Army took over the airports. That's too long ago.
Too long ago. Or before the Germans bombed Pearl Harbor. This is Bradley Moss commenting on an interview that one fellow you might have heard of. His name is John Eastman. He used to be a lawyer.
All right.
And he was interviewed. And the clip,
he was wrong,
I believe, is 1 minute and 36 seconds. I don't know if you have the capability to play it.
I have that capability.
But it is fascinating. It's Laura Ingraham acting as a lawyer. I think she has a law degree.
Yeah, you're right. I believe
so. She's just asking him pertinent questions in a way to not get Fox in trouble. And in doing so, Eastman hangs himself, metaphorically speaking.
Okay. Let's see. Is that in this?
That's in the sin.
Sin. Is it a sin?
Is it
a sin to know? All right. Yeah, I'm going to have to. I can engineer that up relatively quickly.
Okay.
You want to play it?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, cool. Let's try that. Let me see. I got to go to move it to Pocket.
Right. While you're doing that, I'm going to tell you about this next
these buttons. Yes.
Piece. While you play with the buttons, tell me when you're ready.
Maybe.
And this is a Ollie Jong Fast piece from Trump to Vivek. The GOP is primed for another charismatic phony.
Hey, all right.
Although it's a long piece, you don't really need the whole thing. It's just this paragraph here. What's important about Ramaswamy is not his ideology, because he doesn't have one, no coherent one, but how susceptible our political and media ecosystem is to a charismatic phony. He's become a recurring character on cable news, recently claiming on CNN he was misquoted in The Atlantic when raising questions about the 9/11 attacks. But The Atlantic had the tape, which of course included Ramaswamy asking, quote, how many police, how many federal agents were on the planes that hit the Twin Towers, end quote. Denying something which is on tape is totally Trumpy.
That is pretty Trumpy.
That's who he is. And it's interesting that he's not getting the reception from the public. You know, there's only one original.
Thank God for the public, I guess. All right. Well, I have got this thing queued up. I guess I can hit play. This is the John Eastman interview on. All right. Let's see what we got here.
John, and just again, so we clarify this. On January 6th, what did you want to happen? And how was that historically grounded? And the history of our country, how would that have taken place? So just so the viewers can understand what would have unfolded and how that would have ultimately been constitutional.
So there were, several things. Some people had urged that Vice President Pence simply had power to reject electors whose certification was still pending in legal contests.
I don't believe that, but go ahead.
I
don't believe that.
I don't
That's
either.
one thing I don't agree with.
And I explicitly told Vice President Pence in the Oval Office on January 4th that even though it was an open issue, under the circumstances we had, I thought it was the weaker argument, and it would be foolish to exercise such power even if he had it. What I recommended, and I've said this repeatedly, is that he accede to requests from more than 100 state legislators in the swing states to give them a week to try and sort out the impact of what everybody acknowledged was illegality in the conduct of the election.
Interesting.
And I specifically said,
I do have to pause it at this point. No one actually made that request. It wasn't the 100 legislators. It was 0.
Every lawyer on Twitter who I know who saw that has said, "Oh, he literally just confessed to the crime."
Oh, okay. All right. There's a few more seconds, so maybe there's more confession here. But I was like,
and Laura Ingram's really trying to backpedal as much as he possibly can.
Yes. Well, she knows what's on the line.
Well, she's trying to protect Fox from another lawsuit.
Right. All right. Let me run the rest of this here.
Everyone acknowledged it, but that was the argument that was being made, obviously. And there were obviously irregularities that everybody had seen, but whether that was, whether it rose to the level of changing the outcome of the election, again, without a legal proceeding in the states that mattered, the argument ultimately was a difficult one to make. I mean, hence here we are.
And she's right.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, she's clearly, figured out that there's legal liability that could become a problem for her. So, okay, let me adjust all the levels back here. So, all right. So she just says, your whole case was BS.
Right. But Eastman said, no, that's my case. Now, why he's arguing this case on TV when he's indicted in various and sundry places?
Yeah, that's
conspirator, in Washington, but an actual indictment in Georgia, I don't know. If he wants to confess to it and become more than an unindicted co-conspirator, go ahead.
I mean, I guess he can. And of course, so he's trying to tell what he thinks is a better story. It's just not borne out by the facts, for one thing.
I didn't kill anybody. I just robbed the bank.
I guess. I don't know. And then the other part, so he disavows the part where he told Pence that he did have that power, and then says it's really about legislators
it's really about
who weren't
after
there.
The election was already certified, going back and undoing it. What's wrong with that?
Even Ingram doesn't buy it anymore. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/Kagro X gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I'm sure YouTube will be taking down our podcast later for stealing content from Fox News, but I say fair use, and also it's not even news. So anyway, so yeah, there you have it. John Eastman looking for daylight somehow in saying, well, only part of the conspiracy to steal the election is my fault, but that's a lie too.
Why his lawyers would allow him to go on TV and give these interviews, I do not know.
Yeah, I don't know if they cleared it.
It was amazing watching the lawyers look at this and saying, did he just say what I thought he said?
Yeah.
He just admitted to doing this.
Not great, but par for the course in the Trump organization. They all think they're going to talk their way out of these things. I think I saw last night a report that, there was this idea Trump had last week where he was going to have the big press conference this Monday, so a couple of days ago, when he was going to release all of the evidence to prove that he was totally exonerated. Yeah. And his lawyers talked him out of that, but I guess he decided, well, they can't stop me from putting it out on Truth Social piece by piece.
So
he's been doing that instead. And I mean,
I haven't heard about it, which gives you an idea of what kind of impact it's
that's
having.
the good news. And now, I can't even remember exactly what it was.
It's not like I don't pay attention to the news.
I read a little bit. It happened across my desk late last night. And once again, it was, so this is the exoneration. Yes. What's the exoneration? I totally did it. Oh, that's not an exoneration. That's
the John Eastman strategy.
Yeah. Essentially.
It's a bold strategy.
See if I can find it.
See if it works.
It's so crazy. It just might be featured on Meet the Press. So, okay. I'll try and find it, and we'll discuss it in the second hour if I can find it.
Right. Here's
some.
Of course, the other thing on Twitter that is flying around is because Ken Cheeseborough is trying to sever his particular RICO indictment from everybody else, saying, I had nothing to do with the other people. Again, to remind everybody, Fani Willis is trying to weave a story about how everybody did this and each did its small part. And the individuals are saying it was such a small part, I shouldn't be tried with these other people over there. I want to be tried in a way that I can blame them, which is best done when they're not here. So each one wants to do this separately. And who is Sidney Powell?
Yeah.
Is that the Kraken lady?
Yeah, that's right.
So she wants to join Cheeseborough, and Cheeseborough doesn't necessarily want her to join him.
Nobody wants her to join them.
So
please.
The question on the table is this going to be cheese and Kraken, or is it going to be the cheese stands alone?
Hey, I like this. You're going to work for the Post before this is over.
So these are all, lawyer jokes that people are making. I think they're funny because, there's a lot of truth to all of this.
Yeah. All right. Well, no one will want to be co-defendants with Sidney Powell. That's not going to happen.
Yeah. And I'm not sure that John Eastman wants to be linked with Ken Cheeseborough. So, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. So, again, the do it together, take them apart is in the hands of a federal judge. I think, you need a scorecard to keep the players straight, but I believe that's Steve Jones doing that one. Or maybe it's Steve Jones doing the Mark Meadows one. He's definitely doing that one. It could be somebody else doing the Cheeseborough one, but we're still going to have to wait for it. Wait and see in terms of how that all turns out.
I had to wait to hear you say wait and see.
Meanwhile.
Yes.
New York Times is covering something we've covered on the show a lot, which I think is important and often gets under-discussed in terms of what's happening with the election in November.
Okay.
This one is how Trump's election lies left the Michigan GOP broken and battered. And I mention it because Michigan isn't the only party that's in deep trouble. Yes. Blake Masters wants to run for Senate again in Arizona. So he wants to contest Kari Lake. I say one of them should win, and then that'll make Ruben Gallego's job a lot easier.
Okay. But now you're going to be accused of being a secret Republican, right?
No, of election interference.
Right. Oh, is that what the accusation was? Okay, yeah. Right. Well, that's not what happened.
Is election interference, right?
If
you point out anybody who's running for election has done anything wrong, it's election interference.
Right. That could affect the outcome of the election. So, that's the New York Times approach to things too, right? The president
How's Trump election lies left the Michigan GOP broken and battered. Infighting between Trumpacolites and traditionalists has driven away donors and voters. It's driven away Betsy DeVos, who's a Michigan power broker. Mm-hmm. It's left them broke.
Good.
As the party looks toward the presidential election next year, the strains are glaring.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Glare. Like you're
a group
in a
of prominent activists, including a former statewide candidate, was hit this month with felony charges connected to a bizarre plot to hijack election McKean's. That's Matt DePerna. And I think he was running for Secretary of State of all things. And in the face of these troubles, suspicion and infighting has been running high. A recent state committee meeting led to a fistfight, spinal injury, and a pair of shattered dentures.
What? Oh.
Huh.
Shattered dentures even.
Yeah. So now the dentists are all upset.
Okay.
Mr. Trump's election lies spread like wildfire in Michigan, breaking the state party into ardent believers and pragmatists wanting to move on. Bitter disputes, power struggles, contentious primaries followed, leaving the Michigan Republican Party a husk of itself.
Ooh.
A shadow of what it used to be. Representative Lisa McClain, Republican from Eastern Michigan, said it's not going real well.
Yeah.
It's not an opinion, it's a fact. It's just a plain fact. We have to fix that. GOP officials in the state are growing concerned. They don't even have a top-tier candidate to run for the open Senate seat. They don't have any money to push it. The national people, you may recall, have said none of this matters. Everything's changed. We do everything online. We don't need individual state parties. Who cares about them? It's all about reelecting Donald Trump so he doesn't go to prison. And that, of course, leaves the state parties to deal with local elections. And if they're broke and broken, and they go together, how are they going to do that? How are you going to get the on-the-ground people to sign signatures, knock doors, canvass, that sort of thing? The nuts and bolts, as they like to say at Daily Kos, about how to get somebody elected.
Yes. All right.
Matthew DePerno, a lawyer who advanced false election theories, became a folk hero in the state and ran for attorney general. Not Secretary of State, but even worse, Attorney General. Christina Caramo, a poll worker who signed an affidavit claiming she had witnessed vote stealing, became a conservative media star and ran for Secretary of State. And now she's the Republican chair. Michonne Maddock, the leader of Women for Trump, who organized buses to Washington on January 6th, became co-chair of the Michigan Republican Party. That's the state that
Rosalind McGregor's
McDaniel came out of?
Reporting on for us. Yes. Is she Michigan? Yeah, I think so, right?
She used to be Michigan GOP chair, I think.
Yeah. That whole state.
It's the Romney state.
Yeah. Right. I mean,
George
Romney.
He
did adopt that as their, after Mexico, their home turf.
So the moderates are including Betsy DeVos, the ex-secretary of Education, and that's scare quotes, withholding funds from most of the state party.
Yeah.
Other donors similarly express their frustration, so they're giving it directly to the GOP House, who's in the minority. That's all they're doing. They're bypassing the party altogether.
Yeah, great. Well, Rosalind's been covering that very closely at the microscopic level and county by county, but has had a lot to say about Caramo and her internal destruction of the party. It's been fun to watch.
It is, and so that's a swing state I'm not so worried about in the fall. Here's another state, New Hampshire. In New Hampshire, Republicans are feuding over whether the 14th Amendment bars Donald Trump from running for president.
Right. Good for you. It was New Hampshire?
New Hampshire. New Hampshire Republicans are feuding over this. That's wonderful. I love seeing the party split.
That's where Chris Christie has 5% there. He's that's his
that would put
result.
him in second place.
Yeah, I know. Right? So they're doing pretty good. All right, New Hampshire's going to try. Well, or someone in New Hampshire's going to try this. Great.
So a long-shot presidential candidate has filed a lawsuit in state court seeking an injunction to keep Trump off the ballot. And a former Republican candidate for Senate is urging the Secretary of State to bring a case that could put the issue before the U.S. Supreme Court. On Wednesday, Free Speech for the People, a liberal-leaning group that unsuccessfully tried to strike House Republicans from the ballot in 2022, sent a letter to the Secretaries of State in New Hampshire, Florida, New Mexico, Ohio, and Wisconsin, urging them to bar Mr. Trump from the ballot under the 14th Amendment. These efforts employ a theory that's been gaining traction among liberals and anti-Trump conservatives. That his actions, that is to say Trump's on January 6th, disqualify him under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which bars people from holding office if they took an oath to support the Constitution and later engaged in insurrection or rebellion against same or given aid and comfort to the enemies thereof.
Yes. All right.
Why those even states, advocates say it's a legal long shot.
Yeah. It is.
But however long the odds, discussion of the amendment is bubbling up across the country. In Arizona, the Secretary of State said he had heard from concerned citizens about the issue, and the Michigan Secretary of State said she's taking it seriously. Right. In Georgia, officials are looking at precedent set by a failed attempt to use the 14th Amendment to disqualify Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Right.
But New Hampshire has jumped out as like first in the nation.
They want to be first in the nation at something. Although they could rely, if they don't like the result in Georgia, they could look to the result in North Carolina, where at least initially the judge was willing to entertain using it to keep Madison Cawthorn off the ballot. But then Madison Cawthorn decided to keep Madison Cawthorn off the ballot by losing his primary.
Well, the weird thing is that this is a more popular approach with conservatives than it is with liberals.
Okay. Well,
as the article points out, it's appealing to liberals, but most of the recent momentum on this has come from conservative circles. You know, Judge Ludig and the conservative people who wrote the academic article. This is a conservative movement.
I mean, I'll take that as a description if they would like to let that catch on. I think what's actually happening here is
it's in the paper record.
Popular with everybody, but a conservative said it. It's now popular in the paper of record because, you know, when liberal pipe dream weirdos say it, who cares? That's just more vermin supreme garbage. But when somebody who's conservative says it, well, they have a suit and a tie and everything. And so now it's something to pay attention to. I'm going to look for every word I can think of. But now they'll pay attention to it. And so because it's getting attention, now they're like, well, it's more popular among conservatives.
Well, conservatives said it, so it must have depth.
Yes. Now
they're, quote, very serious people.
That's their usual play. Now, how that became more popular among conservatives, I don't know. Maybe that's our own doing. It's our own interpretation of seeing them quoted.
Never Trumpers are the ones that brought it up, and never Trumpers are the ones that are discussing it.
Well, I'm a never Trumper, so it counts. All right.
This goes back to what happened in North Carolina since you brought it up. A case filed against then Representative Madison Cawthorn ended with Judge Richard Myers II of U.S. District Court,
second of
appointee of Mr. Trump, siding with Mr. Cawthorn. The judge ruled that the final clause allowed for a vote in Congress to remove the disqualification and that the passage of the Amnesty Act effectively nullified the ban on insurrectionists. But on appeal, U.S. Court of Appeals overruled that argument.
That's right.
Saying the Amnesty Act clearly applied only to Confederates, not future insurrectionists. The case was declared moot after Mr. Cawthorn lost his re-election in the 2022 primaries.
Right.
Well, you know, that's as a non-lawyer, I never understood moot court.
Oh, well,
right. Why don't you just declare the court moot? Why do I have to participate in moot court? The whole thing is moot.
Right. I'm moot, you're moot. This whole court is moot.
Moot, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why they decided to call it moot court, but they did. All it means is, I guess, it's not a real case. We're just practicing here. That doesn't make it moot. It means it's practice. But mooting a case, you know, that's actually live and does matter, that's sort of a different thing. But okay, they decided to use the same word for that.
Now, many of the advocates, even on the conservative side, think that from a practical point of view, Trump has to be guilty first. Found guilty in court. To find him guilty, then they can go ahead and bring this.
That's certainly the most conservative way of dealing with it, and that's the way I've seen most cautious liberals discuss it as well. But, you know, you could stop wringing your hands and just say, just do it, like Trump would, and see what happens.
Well, you know, I guess my point is the fact that it's being discussed in GOP parties throughout the country isn't a particularly great situation for Trump.
True.
Because it pits one faction of the GOP against another faction of the GOP. And I can't imagine it's going to end like in a kumbaya moment for that individual state's parties. You know, so look what happens in Michigan. They actually come to blows and people break each other's dentures.
These things happen.
You know. So again, you can look at polls right now which are meaningless. Other than to say Trump doesn't start out ahead. That's about the only thing I would say about those polls. And actually step back and look at the individual results, which have been favoring Democrats in every actual election that's been taking place, and then look at the state of the individual parties by state, especially in the swing states, and say, you know what? The GOP has issues.
Yeah.
They're deep. They involve everything from being broke to breaking dentures.
Yeah, and being crazy. And if you break your dentures, they will refer you to Paul Gosar.
So I'm just saying that's not a great sign.
Not at all. Your two choices, actually. Paul Gosar or Dr. Gay Hitler, who's dead. So,
So here's another court story which may or may not have come to your attention. The Proud Boys trial, I think I mentioned on the air yesterday, was halted temporarily because of an emergency. Turns out the judge was sick.
That sounds like not that big of an emergency, but depends. Sick with what? Bubonic plague?
I don't know, but they're going to, I think, do it again next week.
Okay. I mean, maybe it was just COVID. And so...
In court, Trump's supporter faces election official he violently threatened. I think this is worthy of discussion because this should happen more often. The election official, not that people should be threatened, but that folks should be held to account.
Just to be clear. Yeah. What's the story? New York, he threatened somebody?
Washington Post.
Are you sure that wasn't just a regular morning greeting on the street?
Yeah. Election officials, it's not even Trump. The election officials piled into the front row of a federal courtroom, a show of support for a local public official who's endured more than 2 years of attacks for his role in helping to certify Donald Trump's loss.
Okay, this sounds
Clint Hickman's
serious.
simple act, which was required by law and his oath as chairman of the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors, resulted in hundreds of anonymous threats, mostly anonymous. Hickman, a 58-year-old Republican, who has served as a supervisor for a decade, says he's so tired of election denialism and hostility that he's not yet decided if he's going to run for re-election. On Monday, he came face-to-face with one of his harassers, Mark Rissy, a 65-year-old from Iowa.
Iowa?
Yeah.
I thought they were nice.
Well, Midwestern nice.
Right.
Who has worked in customer service in recent years, walked into the courtroom using a cane.
Oh, did he have a fake neck brace on, too?
Yeah, something like that. I love those. He slowly passed Hickman as he made his way to the defendant's table, but that's only like in personal injury things, right?
Right, I guess so.
In April, he pleaded guilty to sending threatening communications to Hickman and the state's former Attorney General, Mark Brnovich, also a Republican. Yeah. He was in court to receive his punishment. The remarkable scene in the Phoenix federal courthouse this week reflected the extent to which the institutions of American politics and justice continue to grapple with the fallout of Trump's false claims. Mm-hmm. So, Trump did a lot of bad things when he was in office, but arguably he did a lot of worse things when he was out of office. And it affected a lot of different states, a lot of different people. We covered the big ones. But stuff like this is happening all over the country, too, and I don't want to forget about it.
Yeah, so good to bring it up. I don't know what the punishment was that he received, but maybe it was a caning, and he brought his own cane, and that's helpful. Why charge the taxpayers for the cane? But I don't think so. I don't think we do that. There's some nice quotes of it, too. Like if you think this kindly old gent, 65-year-old customer service representative, how bad could it be? I guess they have tape, maybe, of the threats. So that sounds like, it's everything you would think would be on a tape-recorded threat, including lots of things that would require us to censor the material if we read it on the air.
Here's a little interesting factoid. Behind him sat Tom Liddy, a fellow Republican and deputy county attorney who helps represent the county in election cases. He happens to be the son of G. Gordon Liddy, the lawyer who devised the botched burglary that led to the Watergate scandal and the resignation of President Richard M. Nixon.
I was just going to make a joke about it, but it's true.
Right.
Okay.
Tom Liddy was fresh off a road trip to Texas where he had read his own victim statement in court proceedings involving a different man who threatened him and his family after Republican losses in 2022.
Oh.
Then there was the county recorder, Stephen Reicher, another Republican who was also targeted by the Texas man and penned an impact statement for these proceedings. Next to him sat Bill Gates, a Republican county supervisor, not the rich guy, and victim of similar threats. And also in the courtroom was Andy Kunasik, a former Republican supervisor who told the Post that last time he had attended a sentencing was for the man who shot a Democratic county supervisor in 1997 for her support of attacks that funded a new baseball stadium.
Well, I can understand baseball. You want to shoot people all the time.
So we'd like it to stop, he said. I'm fatigued. It's basically where a lot of us are finding ourselves at public service.
Right. And remember that Republicans around the world, around the country, or who still identify as Republicans, are outraged that the law enforcement community has turned their gaze on people who are making such threats. How dare you compare us to lawbreakers and terrorists around the world just because we're breaking the law and committing terrorism?
So the U.S. District Judge gave the defendant 30 months, 6 months more than requested by the prosecutor.
Okay.
Drawing audible gasps in the courtroom.
Gasp.
The judge said he hoped the punishment would deter those dissatisfied. And I guess fainting couches were supplied for those who needed them.
Couches. Right, and remember that in the comics, they have to put that in the speech balloon as gasp because no one knows how to spell what a gasp sounds like.
Right, or gasp.
Right. I always
the judge
that.
appeared sympathetic to Ricci, but said, "I believe I'm being compassionate."
Okay,
you get 30 months.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the right amount of time. Sounds good to me. Maybe even a little longer, but I guess they were limited. It's not often that the judges go above and beyond what the prosecutors ask in these cases, but I guess the prosecutors were playing it safe. All right, good.
So this next little piece is about yet another different Republican Party that's split by the Trump stuff, this time in Georgia.
All right, yeah.
As you may have heard, Trump has been indicted by a Fulton County district attorney.
Yes.
As you may also have heard, Georgians passed a law in their infinite wisdom, which allows them to review specific district attorneys in terms of whether they're doing their job.
Oh, yes, right.
That's not good enough because some of the people in the Georgia Assembly want to impeach Fani Willis for having the temerity to indict Donald Trump.
Yes, they will want that.
They do want that.
That was the intent of the law. They're trying to
make moves to do that, and they're trying to do it in a way that's completely unconstitutional. The Assembly wants to declare a special session.
Now they want a special session.
Kemp said, the governor said, that's my job, not your job. You can't
right. Okay, good. Kemp has been put in an odd position here, and he's been performing admirably despite the fact that he's a bit of a
That's one way
himself.
Of saying that the Georgia Republican Party is split because whereas there's people in power from Brad Raffensperger to Kemp who have been doing the right thing, Gabe Sterling, who's an election administrator, who's Raffensperger's deputy, who makes the rounds and cogently makes the point. It's all about rule of law, and we go by the law, and the votes weren't there, and that's the end of it. So there's a cohort of those. But there's also in the House, the Assembly in Georgia, the Marjorie Taylor Greene types.
Yes.
And they're pretty strong in regard to their numbers. And they're agitating. And so they're at odds with the governor. It's a party that's split, and Trump split them. So, for example, the Georgia House Speaker, who's being a grown-up here, siding with Kemp and Raffensperger, has some pointed words about a far-right Republican's fantasy push to impeach Fani Willis in a letter to the GOP caucus. Targeting one specific DA in this manner certainly flaunts the idea of separation of powers, if not outright violates it.
Yes.
A select few are calling to defund a duly elected DA of this state and her office in an attempt to interfere with the criminal justice system, he wrote. And he's referring to a fellow named Colton Moore, politically impossible call for a special session to oust Willis. This is like 2020 all over again as Trump presses Georgia lawmakers, Greg Bluestein writes, to do something that they can't legally do. Back then, it was overturning the election results. Now it's calling a special legislative session to oust DA Fani Willis from office.
Sure.
Even Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene told me the idea of forcing a legislative session to oust Fani Willis is dead on arrival because impeaching the DA requires, wait for it, significant Democratic support. Here's what Georgia Senate Majority Leader Steve Gooch told me about these politically impossible calls for a special session. On State Senator Colton Moore's call for a special session to oust Fulton County DA Fani Willis, most of the people in the caucus would say they feel just as upset and angry about what's going on as Colton does. They want to do something. We haven't made a decision, but having a special session requires a process, and we don't have those votes. You'd have to have Democratic support. And what would you do if you had a special session? In order to impeach someone, the House would have to pass a resolution. Then it would come over to the Senate for a trial that would require a two-thirds majority, and there's simply no way we'd have the numbers to do that. So, in other words, they're going through a process and saying the process doesn't allow this to happen. It doesn't allow it to happen politically. That is to say, the votes aren't there. The mechanism is there, but there aren't the votes to do it. It's like talking about the filibuster in the Senate. Yes, you can do it, but no, you can't do it. By that, I mean there's a mechanism to get rid of it, but there aren't the votes.
Mm-hmm. You can ask about it. You're going to lose, but you can ask. And it's not even clear that you can ask. I guess they're saying that you can, but in some states, a special session of the state legislature is limited in what it can take up, things like that.
Right. So I haven't even gotten into that. But politically speaking, whatever it is, there aren't the votes, so it's not happening.
Okay. You don't even need to address that. That would be a moot point to discuss.
More on this. GOP Senator Bo Hatchett told me what Moore, M-O-O-R-E, is doing is horrible abuse of power. He's using the money he steals from conservatives to attack fellow Republicans, doing nothing but helping the Democrats across the state and putting his conservative colleagues in danger.
Outrageous.
I'm pointing this out because Georgia really is wrecked.
Yeah.
Wrecked. In trouble. The governor can say, well, everybody's behind me and everybody's lined up behind me because I'm doing the right thing. That's not true.
No, it's not. And it is an interesting dynamic all by itself. I mean, I'm wondering at what level he ever considers, I don't know. He probably considers himself a guy, straight shooter and does everything on the up and up. But it wasn't that long ago that the chief Democratic complaint about him was that he was something of an election stealer himself. And what better defense in an atmosphere where Republicans are being tried for their weird election stealing ways, to defend yourself than by looking like the guy who's on the stand-up guy who's on the side of right and the rule of law. And if there's so much attention and so much oxygen being sucked out of the room by the Trump cases, if I can just contribute to keeping that fire going, no one will ever come for me for my having possibly stolen my own election, the way Stacey Abrams said he did.
Right. And this is just hot off the presses here. I'm sending it to you because I don't really have time to go into it, and I don't really understand it anyway.
You're going to make it my problem.
Yeah. But Fani Willis is notifying the chief stands alone and everybody else who wants to do this that there are consequences for asking for a speedy trial. I sent it to you by DM on the app formerly known as Twitter. But it says the filing starts with 4 consequences. They can't argue that they're entitled to the state's discovery responses the same way. The defendants can't argue that they are entitled to notice of the state's similar transaction 10 days in advance of the trial. The defendants are now precluded from calling any witnesses whose statement were not provided to the state at least 10 days in advance of trial, and the defendants cannot complain they received less than 7 days notice of the trial date.
They want it so speedy.
You can do it speedy, but you're cutting off some of your ability to get stuff in advance. She's letting them know.
Okay, well, it's nice of her to allow for them to know that. And
a lot of this is going to be without prior notice. I'm just telling you. I'm giving you prior notice. You
right,
get prior
but
notice.
You just said, okay. All right, well, that wraps it up for the week. We got to decide what we're going to do next week yet. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. There's a lot to go over here and a lot of things left behind here, which are of great interest, and we might, spend some time continuing to look into what Greg has left us with here. And that's because he has good taste when it comes to stories to leave you with. One thing I wanted to mention, I guess, while we were in the middle of all of this is it's interesting that there's this split in the Georgia party that, I don't know, I guess endangers Republican candidates up and down the ballot there. But it's interesting, one, how the sides are breaking down, and two, the idea of using the law for its intended purpose. I mean, I think that the law was passed recently by the Republican supermajority in the state legislature with the idea in mind that they would, in fact, purge the ranks of the DAs. They were going to use their this law as leverage to force people out of office, Democrats, and particularly black Democrats, out of office. And they actually did begin doing this, as I recall, all over Georgia, but starting with local boards of election supervisors or whatever they call them in Georgia. But then now they're running into, I guess this is maybe the political upper limit of it, to take on a name who's now as big as Fani Willis. And they might have been able to get away with this ironically, absent the Trump case. But the Trump case, I mean, this is sort of part of it too. And I know a lot of people have been critical, mostly center-rightists, critical of Fani Willis, saying this, particularly this sprawling approach to bringing a case against Trump, that it's more than simply complementing the federal case, which is more narrowly tailored and sparse and focused on Trump. It's not just taking a different approach because we have a different forum to take a different approach. And I mean, I think that's very wise, just generally speaking, from an overall strategy about dealing with Trump. But a lot of the center-rightists who are upset about her approach, for whatever reason, even though, like, I still don't really understand the upset with her approach. Like, it should be great that we're taking a belt and suspenders approach to this. Like, if you want to shoot for the moon, you do it the way Fani Willis is doing. And if that were the only case being brought against him for election interference, January 6th, etc., then I would say, all right, I understand biting your nails about it because it's putting all your eggs in one basket. But the whole point of these two cases is that, no, we have two baskets here, and this is great. And there might be room for a third or fourth basket, but we don't have those balls rolling just yet. But in the meantime, we have one case taking the widespread, sprawling conspiracy approach, and one case taking the narrowly focused approach. I think that's the most you could hope for. Anyway, but they're angry with Fani Willis or upset or somehow, convinced that she's taking the wrong tack here, or they're convinced that she's some sort of attention seeker, that she's doing this for the publicity or preparing to run for higher office or whatever. She's doing it to bring attention to herself in some way. But that's actually, that too, even if it were true, might not be a bad tactic either. Like, you make yourself a big enough deal, then the Republican legislature's efforts to get rid of you become politically fraught. If you're just a nameless, faceless DA doing your job and keeping your head down, it doesn't become national headlines when lunatic Republicans in the Georgia state legislature target you for impeachment. But now it's sort of like, now you're like one of the untouchables, right? You can't do it without causing a national stir. And that's how you end up finding out that there aren't the votes to do it, even when you have a Republican supermajority in the legislature, even if you don't have a 2/3 supermajority. So, in some sense, that's a very wise strategy on her part, if it were part of her strategy. So I would say, for all the criticism she's received, it may not be true. But if it were true, now I would say, well, maybe there's a special genius in it. But even better would be a special genius in having the benefit of that strategy for yourself without actually having had to come up with and then execute that strategy. So I don't know. At any rate, that's a distinct possibility. I was also going to say the Georgia state legislators are probably quite jealous of their neighbors to the south, where in Florida, they have likewise leveraged a Republican supermajority in the legislature to pass laws allowing their party's operatives who occupy the governor's mansion and run the state legislature to go after local officials and disgorge them from office and force them out under color of law. And they've been doing that left and right. And it's been a source of great controversy for DeSantis, but he's actually, one, he's running for president on that controversy. And two, so far, no indications of a split in the Republican Party in Florida that would endanger him the same way we're supposedly seeing develop in Georgia. But I guess there's always room for it. Since it's happening in so many other states, I guess you might wonder whether it's inevitable in Florida as well. But I guess some lunatic Republicans have to start losing elections in Florida in order to set that off, and that hasn't happened yet. But maybe if the DeSantis campaign continues to fizzle, I don't know whether he's in a position where he would drop out, because as fizzly as it's getting, it's still got him, more or less alone in second place. But if that starts to fall apart, then perhaps Republican operatives in Florida might start to consider the primary process at least a proxy for dangers that they might face in general elections, and might start to wonder, like Republicans in Virginia, is Glenn Youngkin's riding of the parents' rights wave, is that a flash in the pan and maybe we ought to abandon ship because it's not going to work again? They probably should consider it, since Youngkin will never get a chance to test it again, at least not in any race for governor, because they're term limited here in Virginia. But people might start to wonder if DeSantis just can't get it done in the primaries, is it possible that his no quarter approach to the culture wars actually isn't a magic ticket to electoral office? There was some other factor or some kind of perfect storm that made him what he is today, and it'll just stop working at some point? Question mark. We don't really know. All right. So let's see. What other things did I want to sample here? There was there more from Greg? I'm going to have to take a look. Maybe we can circle back to what we were talking about in terms of weirdo grifters at the beginning of the show, just so I can at least lay the groundwork for saying, yeah, there's more than just Andrew Tate. But you should read the update from the BBC about Tate. Just there's some sampling, I guess, throughout this piece, and it's not extremely long, that just gives you some idea of how sprawling the enterprise is, and two, how baseless it is. And you start to wonder, well, how could anybody believe this? And then, I don't know, they believed it $8,000 worth, one at a time. And I don't know. So there's a lot to it. Andrew Tate chats in war rooms suggested dozens of women groomed. They go on to say that they think that the war room chat transcripts that they got are only partial, and so they think that there might be dozens more women victimized by this operation. Jamie Tassin, Tahsin, and Matt Shea are the BBC reporters who put this piece together. Evidence that dozens of women were groomed, because every Republican accusation is a confession, as you know, groomed into online sex work by members of influencer Andrew Tate's War Room group has been uncovered by the BBC. By the way, before I go on with this, I will note for the record that, I got to look in the right place first in order to do it. But got to look back in our KITM hashtag on the former Bird site, I think, to find this thing. Oh, dang, where was it? I don't know. But I think Patrick Snyder sent us something. Oh, it must be. I bet it's in my notifications instead. But then I'm going to lose my spot, and notifications was about something else. But he was letting everybody know that also another example of every Republican accusation is a confession. Because I mentioned that, I'll take this side trip. He sent me this clip from BNO News. Alabama State Representative David Cole, you'll never believe what party he belongs to, arrested, charged with voter fraud for voting in a district where he didn't live. And I'll give you one guess what party, or I'll give you one guess at one letter to tell me which party he belongs to. He's an R, of course. And once again, every Republican accusation is a confession. You know it to be true, and it's true again here, this time about voter fraud, though, not grooming. But as far as every accusation being a confession in the grooming world goes, here's Andrew Tate, arch-conservative and pickup artist. So what's going on here? Leaked internal chat logs identify 45 potential victims between March of 2019 and April of 2020, but the total number is likely to be higher. The texts also appear to show the techniques used by war room members to exploit possible victims. In case you were wondering, how do you groom somebody via text message? And the answer is maybe they're not, super mentally strong to begin with. I don't know. But sometimes it's just straight up gaslighting. They are perfectly competent people, but you convince them that they're not. Anyway, Mr. Tate denies any wrongdoing. Of course, why not do that? And he says he's prepared to defend his innocence, which is, of course, non-existent. He is, in fact, guilty. But, I can say that because in Romania, Americans can say you're guilty even if you haven't yet been proven guilty, because it's Romania, and what are they going to do? Come and arrest me for saying that I think that they should change their legal system? I have a First Amendment right to say so, although maybe not in Romania, but I'm not there. Anyway, there is a warning here. There's a trigger warning in the BBC piece. Warning, some readers may find details of this report disturbing. I find the whole thing disturbing, including the generalities involved here, but for different reasons. A statement issued by his press officer, and he has one, Andrew Tate does, said the BBC's findings represent, quote, another brazen attempt to present one-sided, unverified allegations against him. They are, of course, reporting that someone has made allegations against him. That's the way allegations work. The 36-year-old former kickboxer has been charged in Romania with rape and human trafficking. On August 4th, he was released somehow from house arrest pending his trial. Last week, details of graphic evidence compiled by Romanian prosecutors were revealed by the BBC. It is herein linked, but they go on to discuss it. His brother Tristan and 2 associates also face charges. All have denied the allegations. The BBC's latest investigation, outlined in the documentary Andrew Tate, the Man Who Groomed the World, ? Get it? ? We're not sure that he groomed the world, so we'll put a question mark there. Centers on the 12,000 pages of encrypted telegram messages sent by hundreds of war room members. However, the BBC's access to the logs was limited to those sent over a period of 13 months, so the total number of women possibly targeted and exploited by the group, which was formed in 2019, could be much higher. So, Mr. Tate says the War Room, which costs $8,000 a year to join, and of course it's the BBC, so they also express it in terms of pounds sterling at 6,300, if you want to know, the War Room then is a network of powerful men and those who want to learn from them, although we don't know what those powers are or whether, in fact, any of the people in the War Room are powerful. They just like to say so, and then they use a bunch of pseudonyms, so you can never really tell. The War Room promotes self-discipline, motivation, and confidence building, whilst giving members access to thousands of professionals from around the world who encourage personal responsibility and accountability, but not for Tate, I guess, emphasizing the importance of taking ownership of your choices and actions. And I'm not guilty. The statement issued by Mr. Tate reads, that's his defense of the War Room. It's just a support group. However, the leaked online chats indicate the War Room teaches members through its so-called PhD course how to groom women into sex work. So, by the way, one way they give that away, like you say, oh, their PhD course. Oh, I see. It's like their highest level of achievement. They have tiers of membership, etc., and like the Scientologists or any other weirdo cult, perhaps, you take higher and higher levels. Of course, PhD. Of course, they're referring to the advanced graduate degree, PhD, right? No, I like how they tell on themselves. Wink, wink. Yes, we call it PhD, and we make it capital P, lowercase h, and an uppercase D again. But for us, this is like a way to tell on yourself. We call the PhD, we say the initials stand for, they really do say this, pimpin' hose degree. Get it? Because we're not at all about grooming people or sexually exploiting them. We just want you to have a girlfriend, guys. And I know it's tough out there, and we'll just give you confidence boosters so that you can, one, like you could say, treat women nicely and take them out and dates and respect them, and then see if you have any commonalities and build on that. That would be good advice. But no, we want advice on how to be pimpin' hoes, because of our degree of respect for women. Anyway, that could be a reason why women don't like you by itself. I like to learn about pimpin' hose. Like, say that on the first date and see if it works. Like, they'll advise you. Don't say that. You'll ruin the whole thing. They'll see right through you immediately. Don't be honest about what you're doing. Lie. Then see how that works out for you. All right. Well, at any rate, members are instructed by some of the war room leadership, known as generals, to romantically seduce. I mean, that's the problem. Like, how do you, the new recruits, but that's it. I don't know how to romantically seduce anybody. Oh, well, try, I don't know, drugging them and tying them up, perhaps. Romantically seduce, emotionally manipulate, and socially isolate women before luring them into performing on webcams, often taking all or most of the money they make. So, all right, all of a sudden it's no longer about, well, how do I get a girlfriend? Well, how can I put women into sexual slavery and steal the money from it? Oh, that's different. Anyway, while most media attention around the organization has focused on the Tate brothers, the BBC's investigation found that a self-proclaimed, quote, wizard who goes by the alias Iggy Semmelweis, that's the name that the person has decided to use, appears to be the war room's true leader and intellectual driving force. And one of the war room messages here from June of 2021 gives you some idea, I guess, of what they're up to. A message from Iggy Semmelweis to war room members. Just guys trying to learn how to get girlfriends, right? And these are his instructions. We deliberately reduce attention and note if she chases. Then we set up a, quote, coffee date and execute a move to find out if she is, all caps, willing to pay for our coffee and serve us. So this is like an initial probing. Is this somebody going to be exploitable or not? After that, it becomes a series of gradual steps to remove her entire support structure from her life. That's called kidnapping and brainwashing. Then we punish her for a transgression, real or imagined, by having her get our name tattooed on her, leaving her family's home / apartment / town / country, webcamming / stripping / walking the track for us, getting us girls, escalate. I mean, what a plan this guy has. I wonder whether he's actually able to, execute any of it, or that's the sort of thing that makes us sound like we know about, quote, pimpin' hoes, or not. But that's something, right? I just wanted to learn how to get a girlfriend. Well, how about we teach you how to force them to webcam and strip online and charge people money and you steal it. Wow, that is an escalation. Anyway, the messages exclusively obtained by the BBC suggest violence against women was taught and encouraged by some of Mr. Tate's generals. Among them were photographs of a woman bent over with serious bruising and cuts to her backside, and the tagline, "Who, me?" I don't even know what exactly that's supposed to be, but I guess that's supposed to be feigned innocence. Another post sent by a leading member who uses the alias Joe Lampton described how he reacted to a complaint from a woman who worked for him. "I took her keyboard and hit her in the head with it," the message read. "She went into the room and worked 7 hours without any break." Also, she's Canadian. You wouldn't know her. I mean, this could all be garbage, but it's dangerous garbage, even if it's not true. Anyway, our investigation, the BBC says, has found that as of August of 2022, there were 434 war room members around the world. And I guess if they're all allegedly paying $8,000 a year, I mean, that could be BS too. What are we talking about? 434. I mean, some of them are doubtless freebies. The supposed generals, I'm sure, don't pay. Well, we use you to help recruit other people. But if everybody's paying $8,000 a year, that's $3.4 million a year, by the way. And we don't have that. And we tell nice stories about true stuff that actually happens and advocate not hurting people in this manner. But, you can't win that way. Nice guys finish last, I guess. Anyway, while not all members of the war room will act on its teachings, We, at the BBC, were able to identify many of the women possibly groomed by members of the group, plus a further 29 women who were targeted over the same period. The BBC spoke to 2 women who said they were exploited by war room members. Although they lived thousands of miles apart, their stories indicate that the men were following the same tactics, which makes it a bit of a conspiracy. Anyway, both women said they initially believed that they were in a romantic relationship with these men, who then began gradually manipulating them into sex work, a strategy known as the, quote, lover boy method. He used sex a lot to manipulate me, says Maria, not her real name, from Buenos Aires, Argentina. The women also say they were subjected to violence, isolated from friends, and forced to perform menial tasks to demonstrate their subservience. Amanda, also a pseudonym, who lives on the west coast of the U.S., says she gave away up to 80% of what she earned at any one time, a total of $95,000 to 2 war room members. Amanda told the BBC she was slapped across the face by a, quote, general who exploited her and showed us photographs of the bruising, or who exploited her, and then she showed them photographs of her bruising. She said he had control of everything. According to the leaked chats, war room members appear to believe they are performing Pavlovian conditioning on women. This is how you train dogs, one leaked message reads. Instructions are typically provided by generals. Their grooming method includes tests of submission, such as getting women to tattoo the war room members' initials on their bodies. Eli, a whistleblower who says he spent 2 years as the Tate organization's head of sales and marketing, they actually have one, told the BBC, the war room is all about you getting women that serve you in your life. Eli says he was brainwashed by the Tate group, which he describes as a cult. And I guess once if you can get anybody to do one of these things successfully, I guess they go from loser who can't get a girlfriend to the ultimate alpha male. It's not just that they get girlfriends. It's that they get multiple women to, 1, service them sexually, and 2, give them all their money. And you must be thinking, these guys are gods. I'll do anything for that. It's worth $8,000 a year because I'm making $1 million by exploiting other people. I'm not even doing much work. And the work that I'm doing is humiliating women and exploiting them sexually. What a fantastic time I'm having, they believe, I guess. But Trump world is a sex cult. We have told you that for some time. This is all that motivates them, apparently. Eli also described the role of this supposed Iggy Semmelweis guy within the war room. Asked who was really in charge of the group, the whistleblower said, Iggy is at the top. And there's a picture because they know who Iggy actually is. And you might look at him and say, I don't understand how would anybody say, I should become a sex slave to this person. But apparently it's happening. Iggy's real name is Miles Sonkin. Born in Chicago, Illinois in 1961, he is a former member of at least 2 alleged cults. He developed an interest in the far right in the 2000s and appears to have met Andrew Tate around 2018. Soon after, Mr. Tate started selling his own courses, and the War Room was established in 2019. Mr. Sonkin sends all new members of the War Room a reading list and a manifesto, the sure sign of a stable mind, outlining the group's agenda. When confronted by the BBC outside his home in Los Angeles, California, Mr. Sonkin did not comment. However, it is Andrew Tate, with his 7.6 million Twitter followers and legions of fans who wish to emulate his lifestyle, who remains the group's focal point, despite his upcoming trial. In the statement, his spokeswoman, believe it or not, said the BBC's findings not only present false accusations, but insult the massive community that considers Andrew Tate a life-changing positive force. He's not a positive force, but he is a life-changing force. He gets them laid. That's basically what it comes down to for them. Never mind the fact that all of it is manipulative, fake sex trafficking and rape. But hey, they weren't having any sex before, and now they're having so much of it, it's coming out of their ears, so they believe this is a huge success. He's a life-changing positive force. The statement adds that Mr. Tate is prepared to take all necessary legal actions to defend his innocence, of which there is none, and hold accountable those responsible for defamatory claims. Good luck against the state of Romania. The BBC's investigation suggests his fame is being used to sell a method of abuse to men around the world. And that's exactly what it is. They are absolutely right about that. That should have been the lead. Anyway, now you know what's going on with Tate. And the fact that there were other grifters around the world who were making headlines grabbed me as a possible theme today. Here's an interesting, different sort of story, kind of. How do I even put this? There's no way to transition this, but I guess if you've ever wondered about these sorts of things, either that Tate does and why he's based in Romania, perhaps, and the Russian oligarchs. How do you become an oligarch? Whatever happened? How did that happen? That people just were able to seize that much money and power in the former Soviet Union, and we learned a little bit about it, and it mostly came from the people who became oligarchs were the people who were in position somehow to exploit the privatization of former state assets, right? You know, they used to have the state owned all of the aluminum smelting in the Soviet Union, and we're now privatizing this. Somebody has to own it, and the government is no longer interested or capable of doing it. So they, quote unquote, sold off those assets. And who could raise that much money from a former communist country? Who has $1 billion to buy the assets of the country? And nobody. But if you were the one who was able to force the bureaucrat to sign the paper that you had, quote unquote, paid for it by threatening to cut off all his fingers, that would work and that would do the trick. So now a new generation, because Putin has murdered all his oligarchs, how do you become a new oligarch? Next.
Sup fam, it's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Is this the way we should spend the last segment? Do you want to become an oligarch in the former Soviet Union, the new Russia, but you think you missed your opportunity? Well, vacancies are opening up every day in the oligarchy as oligarchs fall out of windows or have their planes shot out of the sky, or experience aviation emergencies, let's say, mid-flight for one reason or another, et cetera, et cetera. Now, why would you want to become an oligarch when you'll ultimately probably be killed for it anyway? I don't know. But maybe, I guess, the approach is, we're all going to die someday. Wouldn't you rather die having enjoyed sitting on a top of a pile of money for a couple of years before you go? And, if you're convinced that the answer is yes, then you might give it a try. But how do you get into the game, you might be wondering? Here's one possible route, and I wonder whether we are sort of responsible for creating the conditions. But, you can't blame us for creating these conditions. I think this is really just, look, people who are willing to exploit everybody in order to become oligarchs are going to find a situation to exploit no matter what the situation is. If we do this thing, they'll exploit that thing. If we don't do it, they'll exploit the fact that we haven't done it. So you can't really blame yourself necessarily. What's happening here? here's the story of a new up-and-coming oligarch, pro-Kremlin rapper, who calls Putin a die-hard superhero, takes over Domino's pizza outlets in Russia. Interesting. How does this all spell becoming an oligarch? We might be the ones imagining this, but let me give you the thought process as we read through this piece by Frank Andrews at CBS News. What does Domino's Pizza have to do with anything? Much less a pro-Kremlin rapper. And how do you even become a pro-Kremlin rapper? And the answer is by becoming a rapper in Russia, because if you're an anti-Kremlin rapper, you become fertilizer. So, here's that's step one. Anyway, a pro-Kremlin rapper and a Russian restaurateur announced Wednesday that they were taking over all the former Domino's pizza outlets in the country. How can they do that, right? Why doesn't Domino's Pizza say, no, we're Domino's Pizza. You leave us alone. How is it that you're taking over our outlets? And the answer is, it doesn't matter. It's Russia and we'll kill you. And so just leave. But Domino's was leaving anyway. You'll see the whole thing. How do they do this? How can they just take over? Well, for one thing, I guess they're supposedly giving themselves some legal cover by changing the I in Domino for the equivalent Cyrillic letter, which is called, I don't know what they call it, but it's the one that looks like a backwards N. And I guess that's their I. And so basically they're taking over Domino's by making the part of the logo type Cyrillic. And so we're not just stealing Domino's logo, but if we are, what are you going to do? Sue us? Where? In Russian court? Good luck. In American court, we won't show. And if we do show up in America, we'll murder you while we're there. Okay, maybe we'll dismiss the case after all. Anyway, apart from the lettering, the logo appeared little changed. They're not very concerned about copyright or trademark over there. Anton Pinsky and rapper Tate, I don't know if that is that Timothy by any chance in Russian, Timothy or Timati, I don't know. Tomato, Timati, you tell me. Well, anyway, last year they bought 130 coffee shops once owned by Starbucks in Russia. Remember, we're all going to expand into Russia. It's a gold mine waiting to be exploited, et cetera, et cetera. They're dying for Western investment, and we'll do it, and it's a fine idea, and we should absolutely invest in Russia, just as Western capitalists were no doubt encouraged to do, say, before 1917 or so. And then, whoops, it all got nationalized and we lost our shirts. And a couple of years later, you know what? This time they're really going to do it right. They're dedicated to capitalism. In fact, they're hyper-capitalist. So capitalist that they might actually threaten to murder us if we don't sign over all our assets to them. But, the point is they might never do that. Don't deal with mobsters, man. Anyway, so Starbucks said they're dying for Western culture and products over there. We're going to open 130 Starbucks coffee shops in Russia, 150 Domino's pizzas, you name it. They're hungry for Western brands. So hungry that they'll murder us for them. Well, what'd they do? They bought 130 coffee shops once owned by Starbucks in Russia, changing the name to Stars Coffee. The sort of thing that would get you sued here. But again, what are you going to do about it in Russia? Both U.S. corporations pulled out of the country in light of its ongoing invasion of Ukraine, which we all doubtless thought was the right thing to do. And instead, it has actually just created a open exploit for new wannabe oligarchs. But, you can't use that as an excuse to stay. Well, we're going to stay and do business with this criminal regime that has invaded Ukraine just so that we don't get the business stolen from us later on is not a really great look either. So they left, which is a good look, and left behind these assets. Like, we're going to cease doing business here, right? They didn't pack up the stores and take them with them. They left these vacant storefronts, and some thugs said, what if we just steal them and say they're ours? There's no mechanism for saying, no, wait a minute, no, that belongs to us. You have to give us money. Ha! Give you money. How about we don't cut your fingers off? That's enough. Don't you think? So anyway, they just stole it. Both U.S. corporations pulled out of the country in light of the ongoing invasion of Ukraine, which has prompted a dizzying array of economic sanctions against Moscow and by the U.S. and its allies. Pinsky and Timati, who invested millions of dollars into the business, according to Forbes Russia. By the way, get out of Russia, Forbes, said they would retain the franchise's 120 restaurants and more than 2,000 employees. Reuters reported, look, they're saving jobs. They're heroes of Russia, you see. We'll retain the franchise's restaurants. Oh, yeah? Well, no, you won't. Oh, yeah? Well, yes, we will. Well, here is a picture of Anton Pinsky alongside Russian rapper Timur Yunusov, known as Timati, holding a coffee cup with the logo of Stars Coffee after former Starbucks coffee shops reopened as Stars. I like they reopened. We're grand reopening, grand stealing of your stuff. By the way, who's holding the coffee cup? Is the rapper holding the coffee cup, or is I can't tell the difference. Usually you look at these guys and you're like, well, I see which one's the rapper and which one's the oligarch, mafioso thug. But now I wouldn't know if I'd be able to guess here. Let's see. I don't know which one is, and the structure of the sentence doesn't tell me which one's holding the cup of coffee either. That's what it says. Anton Pinsky alongside rapper Timur Yunusov, known as Timati, holding a coffee cup. So maybe it's Pinsky holding the coffee cup. He's tattooed like from the neck down. The supposed, if the other guy is the rapper, he's just wearing a plain white t-shirt and has his hair more or less, in a buzz cut and no tattoos. So you'd think that the rapper would be the tattooed one and wearing the flashy sunglasses, etc. But I can't tell for sure from the structure of the sentence. Anyway, their theft. Their announcement came 9 days after the company that operated the Domino's brand in Russia, Turkey, Azerbaijan, and Georgia, DP Eurasia, I guess Domino's Pizza, DP, said it was filing for bankruptcy, having tried and failed to sell the franchises. That's how they were going to leave Russia. We'll sell off our assets and leave. But interestingly, they could find no buyers. Why is that the case? I'm going to guess here. I would like to run Domino's Pizza in Russia. It's a very lucrative business. I'll buy it. No, you won't. Not the state stepping in saying, no, we're going to nationalize Domino's Pizza and your comrades will benefit from the brand value. No, that's oligarchs saying, if no one is, look, I'll kill you if you bid on this legitimately, because I want them to go bankrupt so I can just scoop up the assets for next to nothing, claim that they are mine, and exploit the business and continue selling Domino's Pizza. The average Russian doesn't care so much. Doesn't bother them that their money is going to oligarchs. They have no choice. So just so long as I continue to get the pizza, that's what makes me happy. But no legitimate bids for this. No. And I guess that's the ultimate lesson is no, you can't just legitimately, privatize the Russian economy. And everybody who went to try to do so either lost their shirt or had to agree to, involve themselves in the mafia style mobster dealings that were going on there and put themselves in harm's way in so doing, because, why would the mob let them continue to keep their profits? They'll eventually threaten you for your piece of the business too, until you just decide to retire or go into bankruptcy and not be able to sell off your assets. So I think that's probably what happened there. Russia passed a decree this April that allowed the national government to seize the assets of companies from unfriendly countries, which has led to numerous rebrandings. That's a nice way of putting it. And I guess that's how the government got itself involved here. Why would the government get itself involved here? Could be a good governance issue if you just like law and order. But if you're Vladimir Putin, mobster supreme, you say there's a lot of value being left on the table here. And I don't know if I trust everybody to kick up appropriately. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create the mechanism. I'll be in control of the mechanism by which these mobsters who want to seize control of these assets can do so with legal cover. And there's a premium to be charged for that. You won't be bothered by the police nationally or internationally for your copyright infringement and your outright theft of these assets, because we will, quote unquote, legalize it, probably in exchange for some certain fee to be kicked up to the government and or Vladimir Putin himself along the way. So, under the guise of, well, we're seizing the assets of unfriendly countries who are imposing sanctions on us and reselling them to people, sometimes for $0, but just so long as some percentage of it ends up in my pockets. Who else has had this happen? Lego blocks, for instance, have become World of Cubes in Russia, while McDonald's restaurants morphed into Tasty and That's It eateries. That's what they call it, right? What should we call new McDonald's? McDougal's, right? No, then we'll get in trouble with the Coming to America franchise. How about what can we say? These burgers is tasty. That's it. Okay, that's the name. Tasty and That's It eateries. And Krispy Kreme donuts became Crunchy Dream. And in many ways, I mean, this is evil at bottom, but I have to say, does this feel like maybe even a little bit of okay comeuppance for like the greedy corporations and shareholders and operators, oily operators who said, you pay me a big consulting fee and I'll show you how to exploit the emerging Russian market. Although I don't know whether the consequences came down hard enough on the people who sold the quote unquote consultancy of doing it. They probably got paid and got out. And in the meantime, in the boardrooms, they're upset because my foreign investments aren't working out. But anyway, you wonder whether there were some greedy executives who thought they were going to make a mint forever, but instead have lost all their investments, just been stolen away from them by mobsters. Lego, McDonald's, Krispy Kreme, etc. Timothy or whatever the rapper's name is, whose real name is Timur Yunusov, has long supported the Kremlin with his music. In 2015, he rapped on a song that included the lyric, "My best friend is Putin," describing the Russian leader as a die-hard superhero. Timothy and Pinsky revealed the Star's coffee rebrand. I love how they get to use corporate language for this theft. In August of last year, Pinsky said at the time that he'd paid around $6 million for the assets, according to Reuters. That, again, is supposed to give it some sort of legal status. He paid for it. And $6 million isn't nothing. Of course, most people would say, well, for 130 Starbucks outlets, $6 million is nothing. Well, but they were in bankruptcy. They couldn't find a buyer because I threatened to murder anyone who would buy the place, most likely. $6 million, 130 stores, $46,153.85 per store. If you could buy a Starbucks outright and own it top to bottom for $46,000, you'd probably do it too. And but you'd have to be able to somehow get that set as the price. And the real question is, how did that get settled as the price? And who did he pay it to? Anyway, so that's supposed to make us stop questioning. That's the end of the article, and we're supposed to stop questioning there. Well, he paid. Yeah, kind of. But there's a lot of between-the-lines reading that is necessary to do. Anyway, lots of interesting grifts going on out there, and lots of interesting Russian everything happening along the way. Let me throw in another Russia story, even though I have so many other things to get to that are more important. But that's what we'll say Friday is going to be for. I started reading this article that I thought would make for a Friday article, but maybe we've segued into it, from the Foreign Policy Research Institute, about which I know next to nothing. But we have this article here from Dan Whitman it's published here again in the Foreign Policy Research Institute. Who is Dan Whitman? He's described in a little blurb here. 2023 Templeton Fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute, whatever that might mean, and a former Foreign Service officer. So he considers himself very much in the know about what Russia is up to. And it's a rather lengthy article, but I can give you the bullet points in case we don't get to all of it. Bottom line section here with some bullet points. Recent gains by Russian disinformation in Africa make up one of the quickest propaganda victories in history. And guess who might be behind a lot of it? The Wagner Group, whose leader was just blown out of the sky, or had an aviation accident. fatal aviation accident in Russia. Wagner Group and Kremlin narratives work to Russia's material advantage and to Africa's strong disadvantage. Another bullet point here. Understandably, Western governments are skittish toward employing underhanded tactics to counter Russian lies. An alternative to inaction could be to marry Western government resources with the work of non-governmental organizations in Africa and elsewhere. And then finally, as is sometimes said about climate change, it may already be too late to mount efforts to remedy the situation, but that is hardly a reason for doing nothing. That's the bottom line takeaways in bullet points form that Dan Whitman's trying to get across here. Now for some of the details. In 2018, Yale scholar Timothy Snyder called Russian disinformation operations in the 2014 Russian annexation of Crimea the most sophisticated propaganda campaign in the history of warfare. Likewise, recent advances of Russian disinformation in Africa have resulted in some of the swiftest successes in the history of propaganda. They lie mainly unopposed by any country, Western or otherwise. There's just not the resources or interest, frankly, probably, in reality, in combating Russian misinformation. You can't do it everywhere. You just simply don't have the resources. And probably first on the list of places that American operatives of all sorts are most likely to abandon most quickly, Africa would probably be chief among them for various reasons. Addressing the challenge at this late stage would not be closing the barn door after the horse escaped. There was hardly ever a barn door to begin with. Alarm bells blare as we slumber. This need not be the outcome if we catch ourselves in time, although it sounds like it actually is going to be the outcome no matter when we catch ourselves, because there was never a barn door even. Anyway, so he seems to have written that off, but now he wants us to get back in and listen to some advice here. 2 weeks before his death or disappearance on August 23rd, Yevgeny Prigozhin was photographed at a desert site, very likely in Africa. With the partial unraveling of the Wagner Group in late June, Wagner forces were largely removed from Bakhmut and other Ukraine sites and redeployed to the African continent. Why? How? Under what circumstances? He explains. This is partly a strategic maneuver, partly a workaround of Article 357 of the Russian Criminal Code, which outlaws mercenary activities in Russia. According to the bizarre Kremlin logic, the Donbass, Bakhmut, and Crimea are Russia. Ergo, Wagner's departure from those areas to operate elsewhere. Dramatic advances in the Sahel, S-A-H-E-L, Sahel, are nothing new, but a deepening of a presence established earlier. Prigozhin's death or disappearance will not slow these advances, but only require tweaks in personnel and leadership, and perhaps a bit of rebranding, there's that word again, if the Wagner moniker disappears. And you can see how easy it is to, quote-unquote, rebrand things in Russia. So, you know, it's not going to be all that difficult to deal with. The Sahel, by the way, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, as you may have gathered from context, but I will tell you from Wikipedia, is in fact a region in Africa defined as the ecoclimatic and biogeographic realm of transition between the Sahara to the north and the Sudanian savanna to the south. Okay. Having, you get the idea of where we're talking about the Sahel, Sahel, yeah, I guess Sahel, I don't know. I'm looking at the pronunciation guide. But this part of Africa includes from west to east parts of northern Senegal, southern Mauritania, central Mali, northern Burkina Faso, the extreme south of Algeria, northern Niger, the extreme north of Nigeria, Cameroon, and the Central African Republic, just out of habit on this show, Central Chad, Central and Southern Sudan, the extreme north of South Sudan, Eritrea, and the extreme north of Ethiopia. It's basically a band from west to east across what we'll say north central Africa, not the Sahara, but yeah, like I say, just south of the Sahara, and a band all the way across. I don't know So I guess that's got some, it's similar in climate and ethnic makeup, I guess. Is that why it's it's an odd thing. You would look at it and think it was a gerrymandered district just to look at it, but it's just a strip straight across Africa. Not something that I'm used to dealing with or referring to. But anyway, these foreign policy types, I guess they know these things. So where were we with this? All right. So they may end up rebranding Wagner and using Russian law previously, I guess we didn't know anything about it. All of a sudden, mercenary activity inside Russia was actually against the law the whole time, but I guess they decided to look the other way while Prigozhin was in favor. And then when he was not, we have reason to use the law, the ability to use the law to expel all Wagner operatives from Russia proper so that they can't do this coup thing again. And let's put them all somewhere else, like Africa. The lines distinguishing between coordinated Kremlin propaganda and aggressive military actions abroad have been blurred from the start, that's for sure. The Central African Republic is largely already a Russian vassal state, says our author here. The UN Security Council, in fact, approved Russian military training, quote-unquote training, to stabilize the Central African Republic in 2017, not quite imagining what it would turn into. And I don't know if we ever had a really clear view of what these things would turn into. But amazingly, a Russian vassal state created by the UN giving approval to Russian military training to stabilize the country, and then they were just like, well, let's just keep it and loot it. What about that? And the UN, I guess, too embarrassed and too really probably powerless to dislodge them. And what are they going to do? Bring up a UN Security Council resolution to dislodge them? Russia was handed the successor seat on the UN permanent as a permanent member of the Security Council. They can veto any sanctions taken against them by the UN. They probably not quite imagined what it would turn into when the UN said, Russia should be the successor to the Soviet Union. Even though by that point they should have known that the Soviet Union wasn't a great partner in UN activity anyway. But I guess they were better then than they are now. Now, Russian operatives work openly in Mozambique, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and have established physical disinformation infrastructures in South Africa. Soon also, it is claimed, in Kenya. Like stockholders balancing their portfolios, Russians support both sides of the current Sudan conflict, because I guess they want inroads there. The process is clear enough. Sahelian and other African countries abound in mineral wealth, all too rarely benefiting the populations sitting on top of them. Wagner, or perhaps soon a substitute entity, quote-unquote, protects military regimes from their own people. It's a protection scam, you see. Then, in a diabolical quid pro quo, gains access to precious metals, gold in the case of the Sahel. That's the reason for their interest in it. It's not the sand. These resources sustain Russian objectives in other conflicts. Red Ukraine. Gold from the Sahel gives Russia cash to buy military material from international weapons markets, and then some. Overlapping elements of disinformation and hard military power work closely together, sometimes in disciplined coordination, sometimes through random actions that feed each other's goals. Nothing original here. Military interference, active measures, disinformation, all have been used in tandem since they were invented. Relying on sanctions and on something called history to bring down the Russian regime in due time is magical thinking. This is hardly a strategy. Let history be the judge. Yeah. By the way, that's not a great strategy for dealing with our own internal problems either. The damage done by disinformation may have longer lasting and more pernicious effects than ephemeral military mischief. Credit, in quotes, where it is due. Building on centuries of practice, Russia has worked the disinformation system well enough to outflank Western governments' efforts to counter them. Russia has long been a world leader in active measures, stretching from the Cold War to antecedents as far back as Tsarist times. Western responses have been feeble at best. Russian adventures in Africa build on a solid foundation of interference in countries we keep closer track of, like the United Kingdom and Brexit, the U.S. 2016 elections, and efforts at fragmenting Western Europe through actions, some clandestine, some quite visible, favoring separatist movements in Catalonia, Basque Country, Scotland, Wales, Veneto, is that pronounced correctly? Sicily, and, oh boy, what's this one? Vojvodina? I don't think I'm even familiar. Moscow also keeps the pot boiling in conflict areas with Russian minorities. Transnistria in Moldova and South Ossetia and, Abkhazia in Georgia. The pattern is well established and the record of success is remarkable. Destabilize where possible for fun and profit. So, the next section here that we no longer have time for, just giving you some ideas of the title headings. Russian inroads in Africa, certainly something to worry about here. Old think and new think. What's a democracy to do, they ask. In the Cold War, my colleagues and I in the Foreign Service believe that employing the tactics of the other, i.e. the Soviet Union, only makes us resemble them. This remains true, but transparent new measures become urgent, and of course there can and must be some. Between silence and resignation on the one hand and lies on the other, surely there's a vast reservoir of alternatives, and I guess they'll be exploring what could be done. And in fact, that's the next section. What is to be done? Although that borrows from communist propaganda itself. But yeah, he apparently has some plans that he lays out in this piece for cooperation with non-governmental organizations and voluntary private organizations to try to effect the change here so as to, I guess, avoid dirtying the hands of Western governments with retaliatory but similar active measures. Very interesting. A refocus of our attention. I don't know if it's going to succeed or whether we actually do well by moving our focus to Africa, but making ourselves aware of the fact that this is happening, along with the weird new Silk Road efforts by China to ingratiate themselves in places around the world, including in Africa, mineral-rich Africa. Just a reminder that the international forum remains important, and we can't just simply be distracted by putting Donald Trump on trial and retreating from the rest of the world. But hey, that's part of what makes the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, for instance, an interesting destination and required listening as it follows us here on Netroots Radio every day. And in fact, today, no exception, but we'll start at home. The Houston school libraries have been turned into discipline centers in a hostile takeover by the state and super jerk Greg Abbott. Public defenders sued an Oregon county over systemic courthouse racism. That sounds like an interesting story. That and much more, of course. I can tell you about some of it next.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Here's more. The Los Angeles City Council wants to sue Texas. Go for it. And its governor, yay, for sending over a dozen busloads of asylum seekers to the city since June 14th and to investigate whether Abbott's actions violated any criminal laws. Internationally, focus on Cyprus, where police arrested 21 people wearing hoods and brandishing bats who tried to attack Syrian refugees. We'll see you tomorrow.